Chapter 1. They killed him! They killed him! When I heard my aunt's voice, I felt joy. I'm okay, I thought. My aunt had gone outside to make a phone call. Even though I was hurt, and I knew that I was dying, I felt at peace. It was a sort of trance produced by the loss of blood. As I felt the life slipping out of my body, I heard a voice that told me I would make it. Hearing it filled me with enough strength to get up off the floor. My left knee failed me. It was fractured. I fell, and as I was about to hit the floor, I pictured my daughter. I prayed to God so he would save me. "It's not fair, Father. My daughter's only 2 years old," I exclaimed. In that moment, I heard my cousin's voice, and it felt like a miracle, an answer to my prayers. "He's alive! He's alive!" My aunt, her face filled with anguish, came close and said, "Mijo, how are you feeling? You're alive, thank God!" "Call an ambulance," I told her. "Please, get an ambulance." Again, she ran to her phone and dialed desperately, as I tried to look around at the horrifying spectacle that this crowded restaurant had turned into. Blood, death, pain, fear, anguish. All elements of the hell I found myself in, and that, from this moment on, I was determined to escape. "Take me downstairs now. I'm going to bleed out," I shouted. "We don't want them to come back to finish the job," answered one of the waiters. I didn't care if they came back for me. I wanted to save myself. I had to do something to preserve what little life I had left in me. "Take me down," I told him. The waiter hesitated for a second, but looking at the anger on my face, he realized he had no other option. When I was on the sidewalk, as I prayed for the arrival of the ambulance, 2 policemen arrived on a motorcycle. Immediately I felt a stinging fear that the hired killers, to make sure that they had completed their mission, had sent these agents to finish the job. That was how these groups operated. "Come here, brother. My name is William Rodríguez Abadía. Please don't move from my side," I told one of the police officers that got off the bike. The uniformed man took his time, looked at me, smiled, and said, "Don't worry about it, boss. I'm staying right here." I had never felt so relieved. I was always surrounded by bodyguards, hired guns, and men willing to do anything to save me. And now it was a policeman who, paradoxically, was bringing me momentary relief, which let me flash back to how it all went down. It was Friday, March 24th, 1996, a day that would mark my life and that would trigger a change that, surely, my subconscious mind had prayed for. I had been born in a household led by my uncle, who, to my knowledge, was an honorable businessman. For many years I remained unaware of my uncle's true occupation, aided by my father, Miguel, which is why I grew up thinking that wealth was something normal, even though they had always told us that in order to achieve anything one had to earn it. I started to question the true nature of their double lives when I was a teenager. We were always surrounded by bodyguards, and people always made comments that, eventually, started filling my head with doubts. Doubts that were, however, soon calmed by undeniable truths. This is my family. This is my father. This is my uncle. All we really have in the world is family. But the most powerful and influential argument against believing all of this was the comfort that having money brings. In my case, due to certain situations I had faced as a child, which I will explain later, my conscience had been easily bought. Instead of continuing to ask myself these questions, I followed the custom in the Rodríguez family, led by my uncle, who reminded us every time he could that money can buy anything. Once I understood this way of thinking, I dedicated myself to living my life like the son of any wealthy man, trying not to call any attention to myself so that I could continue to live a normal life as a student and a teenager. I have always been a man that has been close to God. His light has protected me on numerous occasions, saving me from death more than once. This is why I worship a miraculous Christ, that has his home in Buga, a municipality close to Cali. That Friday, I was supposed to go to the church in Buga with my childhood friend, Oscar Echeverri. As I had asked, Oscar got to my house quite early. We left after breakfast, unaware that, at the same time, on the opposite end of Cali, they were putting the finishing touches on a couple of white vans, made to look exactly like those used by police. Inside of these vans there were 6 men, all armed with 7.65mm pistols with silencers and equipped with radios, who were getting ready to carry out one of the biggest assassination attempts in the city of Cali's history. At this time, I was in charge of moderating relationships with different groups of drug traffickers that were fighting, naively, to take control of the business. I had taken on this role with my father's request. Backed by the leaders of the paramilitary forces of Colombia, the AUC, they had murdered José Jepe Santa Cruz Londoño, one of the 4 leaders of the Cali Cartel, and they feared our retaliation. Because of this, I had to organize various meetings, attempting to mediate and resolve conflicts due to malicious rumors that had been started by Wilber Alirio Varela, alias Jabón, a killer that had gained the trust of Orlando Henao, the leader of the biggest cartel at that time, the North Valley Cartel, Cartel de Norte de Valle. Oscar, along with my wife and I, were getting ready to set out for Buga as we finished breakfast. After giving the last couple of spoonfuls of compote to my daughter, I got a call from my Aunt Amparo. She needed me at the headquarters of America de Cali immediately. My Aunt Amparo, a woman with great entrepreneurial potential, was in charge of the administrative side of things in the corporation. I was responsible for the athletics and the teams, as had been decided by my father. Soccer was a passion that my father had passed on to me as a kid. Don Miguel Rodríguez loved the red shirt of America de Cali more than anything, and in one form or another it explained his life's philosophy. America de Cali represented the people. It was the voice of those that had nothing, the champion of the displaced. The influence of my father on Colombian soccer lasted from 1980 until the time he lost his freedom. It was always mentioned in bad faith that we had used the team to launder money. Nothing could be further from the truth. We were moved by a certain passion known as la machita, something that is tattooed in our hearts. Plus, it helped me deal with the frustration I felt over never having been able to go pro in soccer, a dream that I had since I was a child, while watching my idols like Diego Armando Maradona and Johan Cruyff. I have always been excessively obsessive in everything I have ever done. I got that from my father, who told me over and over that the world did not belong to those who are mediocre. That maxim is extremely evident when it comes to soccer, a sport where winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. And that's how it is. In soccer, no one ever remembers who came in second. Because of this, I had accepted the mission of turning this team into champions, carefully examining every single strategy and way of playing of all European teams, especially those from Holland, Italy, and Spain. I wanted America to be the best team in the world, not only for personal satisfaction, but to show my father and the rest of my family that I could do whatever they asked of me. In response to my aunt's phone call, I headed straight to the team's headquarters, accompanied by my friend Oscar Echeverri. Located in a remote neighborhood in Cali, quite close to Estacion Avenue, America's headquarters was made up of a building with 2 floors, with spacious inner patios that gave it an airy feeling. As soon as I got there, I headed straight to the 2nd floor, where my aunt was waiting for me. The meeting had to do with a negotiation with the Portuguese team Porto that wanted to buy Jorge Hernan Calarca Bermudez, a Colombian soccer player who played as a defender, not only on our team but also for the national team, and who was then at his best professionally. After this meeting was over, we had another meeting with the president of the association and the other directors to discuss some pending business regarding the professional team. When I was finally finished, I invited my cousin Maurizio and Nicole Para, my friends since school, to eat at a nearby restaurant called El Rodizio. Nicole, who had, in a twist of fate, ended up being the man in charge of my father's security detail in the war with Pablo Escobar, had always kept me updated on anything that was going on in that war, which, one way or another, affected my entire family. Nicole, El Gordo Oscar, and I agreed to meet. I asked Gordo to call Juan Carlos Delgado, an ex-lieutenant that had retired from the military, who had also worked for my father, but now worked for me. Juan Carlos helped a lot when I was in Bogota lobbying congressmen at my father's request. He was a loyal man. We became good friends after having been through difficult times together. Nicole handed me the phone so I could convince him to come to the restaurant. Juan Carlos was with his girlfriend at that moment, a fact that would haunt my conscience for a long time. That day I had forced him, unintentionally, to go to his death. When he suggested that we meet up later since it was Friday and I wanted to spend a nice evening with my friends, I promptly changed my tone of voice from a cordial invitation to ordering him to show up, to accompany me as a driver and a weaponless bodyguard, due to the laws imposed by Cali's mayor, Mauricio Guzman Cuevas, that suspended the ability to carry firearms in an attempt to reduce the violence in the city. We were getting ready to leave the headquarters with no clue as to the fate that awaited us. My cousin Mauricio got a call that kept him from joining us, so we said goodbye right then and there. I will never forget that, as we were leaving the building, I noticed a man on a motorcycle that stared directly at me and sped off. That compañero, or lookout, was just the tip of the iceberg. The base was the rest of the operation that was slowly developing militarily to carry out an attack, like the one that was waiting for me. This operation included having detailed city plans, escape routes, and, if it became necessary, enough ammo in case a violent confrontation ensued. Their mission was to take us by surprise. To do this, they needed to move according to our movements, which is why their communication and their tracking had to be impeccable. The plan consisted of killing us so they could weaken my family militarily and politically. The same strategy that, at one point, had been used by Pablo Escobar in the war between the Cali Cartel and the Medellin Cartel. These were not great moments for my family. The two heads of our family were behind bars, which left us vulnerable and at the mercy of those violent winds that blew south from the North Valley Cartel. It was also not easy to lead a normal life. Having our last name, Rodríguez, had in times of prosperity brought me power and friends. But at the first sign of trouble, those friends ran to hide behind their paper houses, pointing their finger accusingly at those that had been there for them. That was a great lesson that life taught me. It helped me realize that power and wealth are fleeting. But during this particular time, I did not see things that way. I felt like I was on top of the world. My ego was inflated because I had what most men want: power and recognition. At some point, I even started believing mistakenly that I was some kind of superhuman man that could do anything, and, tragically, believed I was immortal, immune to anything. A belief that would lead me to make the worst mistakes of my life, as also did my uncle and father for believing they were untouchable. I never thought that day would come, but death always comes, suddenly, and with no exceptions. Once we were at the restaurant, we sat at a rectangular table, ready to delight ourselves with some delicious meat. We were eating and chatting cheerfully. Due to pure coincidence, my Aunt Amparo, her two daughters, and her sister-in-law, Ana Melena, who worked as an advisor at America de Cali, were eating at the same place. Thankfully, they were sitting at another table, close enough to exchange looks with one another that made us feel safe. As we enjoyed our lunch, time passed with discussion of trivialities and the sharing of anecdotes about our lives that, when we looked back, had completely changed. We laughed a lot, aided by the comments made about how great our beloved team had been doing. In one of those moments, when the pleasurable sensation created by laughter is dulled by the reality around you, I noticed 4 men that were doing exactly what we were doing a couple of tables away, in the opposite direction of my aunt's table. They seemed to be eating lunch, and once in a while they would all gaze at our table, trying to recognize one of our men, or so I thought. It was an instant, a moment, an eternity. I guess you never really know for sure. Suddenly a voice or a noise would take me away from my train of thought, which could have been the clear path forged by intuition. The path that could have meant salvation for all of us had I not faltered, and had I not thought that I was making a big deal out of nothing. The way that they were dressed, the blue shoes that one of them was wearing, and the fact that they seemed to be ordering food calmed my suspicions, and I went back to sharing laughs and enjoying the meat that, according to my friends, tasted better than ever. As I sat there eating the meat that had been cooked perfectly, the 2 vans carrying the 6 men arrived at the door and identified themselves as members of the National Police. Having thoroughly examined their identifications, my men put up no resistance at all, and when the killers were sure that none of them were armed, they shot them all at point-blank range. They used 9mm guns with silencers, which prevented us, engulfed in laughter, from hearing the guns go off. It was 1:55 p.m., the exact time that I made the last call before the attack. I called my wife, wanting to know if her and my precious daughter had eaten lunch. She told me that the compote from that morning had made my daughter feel sick. She gave me good news. The 2 loves of my life were perfectly fine, which led me to say, without knowing why, "I love you both. Take care of my daughter." "Is something wrong, my love?" my wife wondered aloud, maybe a little surprised at the comment I had made. I responded by saying that I simply wanted to hear her voice. Remember that you are always in my heart. My wife, understanding and loving as always, said goodbye with a, "I will see you later," a moment that never came. As soon as I hung up, as if it had been perfectly timed, the 4 men sitting at the table opposite from us, who had seemed suspicious to me, stood up, got their weapons out, and shouted, "Everybody stay still! Nobody move!" In that moment I thought they were there to kidnap me. 2 of them stayed back, watching the backs of the executioners. The other 2 came closer, and one of them shouted, "There he is! The motherfucker in the white!" I was not wearing white. I was wearing green. The one in white was Nicole. That was the excuse that the leaders of the North Valley Cartel would use to justify their actions, saying that it had been a mistake, that I was not supposed to be there. But it was impossible that they had been unaware. They had been trailing us since we left the headquarters. The strategy of this new cartel, which was beginning to exert their power as the biggest cartel in Colombia, and was led by Orlando Henao and Efrain Hernandez, alias Don Efra, was to weaken us, murdering the heads of security for both my uncle and my father. Some evidence to back up this statement is that the day before my assassination attempt, they had killed Edgar Veloza, alias El Mono, the man in charge of handling my uncle's security detail in the war with Pablo Escobar. Criminal organizations exist and are able to work in the shadows because they have men willing to follow orders without asking why, which is also how armies work. Nicole was not an exception. He was one of the men that knew and led our military apparatus, and because of this, had been responsible for sparing and taking lives in exchange for money. Any organization can grow strong when it has a fast response time, and for that, men like Nicole are needed in the ranks, who are willing to put an end to anyone and anything to prove their loyalty to their boss. This is why the top priority that day had been to kill Nicole. I suppose that the hired killers called their bosses to let them know that I was there before they carried out their orders. I am sure that Don Efra and Orlando Henao said, without a second thought, "Go right ahead." I was in charge of wielding the Cali Cartel's political power. It was 2 birds with 1 stone. The men began shooting. Instinctively, I put my arms up, covering my head from the bullets. The force of the bullets threw me backwards, and I fell on a table that flipped over. This table served as my shield. Once I was on the floor, I heard more gunshots. Oscar tried to get up, and the man with the blue shoes shot him again. Juan Carlos was shot in the aorta. He bled out immediately, and his blood reached me, which led the killers to believe that I was dead. On the floor, all I could see was the movement of their feet. The one that moved the most, from one side to the other, was the one with the blue shoes. They fired 95 rounds. I got shot in the left wrist, in the right forearm, 2 times in my abdomen, once in the groin, and once in my knee. When I was falling, I got shot 2 more times, once in the back of my left leg, and the other grazing my right leg. This fleeting moment felt like an eternity. Life passes us by in a second. I remembered the things that I had to repent for, and like a miracle, after having done that, I felt like I had connected with something that I will never be able to explain for sure. A moment of peace, tranquility, and relief that was interrupted by horrified screams. "They killed him! They killed him!" When I was on the sidewalk, the blood kept looking for a way out. And when I felt like I was about to collapse, as if sent by God himself, the 2 policemen showed up. A rare occurrence when a group has carried out an operation like this. A fundamental part of ensuring the mission's success is to make sure that the authorities do not show up while you're carrying it out. But I was not meant to die that day, and when I saw one of the policemen heading in my direction, my first reaction was to ask him to stand by me. When he called me boss, I felt safe. Not because I was his boss, but because I felt his support, even though I still felt like I was about to die. For that reason, I said to him, "I'm going to die." The agent, with words that seemed to me the nicest words I had ever heard, said, "Don't you have someone to live for?" Again, I thought about my little daughter, about my wife, and what I wanted to do with my life if I survived. But the ambulance was still not there. The reporters were. Near the restaurant, having been reporting on the death of the sports leader, Alex Goriev, there had been many reporters that headed straight toward the restaurant upon seeing so much commotion. They got there and recorded the images that would spread across the globe. My guardian angel stayed with me until the ambulance got there, an event that revealed an even bigger problem, one worse than the attack itself. Nicole's little brother, Fernando, had survived despite being shot in the head. Because we were not related, the policy made it clear that the first person that was to be taken to the hospital was the one who was in the worst condition. They wanted to only take Fernando and to leave me there. So in a moment of extreme anger and frustration, I shouted at them, "Get the man in charge of this ambulance here, immediately!" Despite my wounds and the loss of blood, when he got to me, I grabbed him by the neck and told him, "I can survive. Take me." For this reason, they put Fernando on the stretcher and let me sit on the side, where they usually take family members. The stretchers used on ambulances have these kinds of areas meant to be held onto. I grabbed onto one of them as if it was salvation itself, while still in the company of the policeman, who was trying to calm me down, telling me that there was nothing to worry about since we were almost at the hospital. Later on, my wife told me that between the shooting, the death of my friends, the walk down the stairs, and the arrival at the hospital, only 5 minutes had gone by. To me, it had been an eternity. Before passing out, I managed to ask forgiveness from the Christ of Buga for not having gone to see him that Friday. I felt bad. The night before I had made a promise, and now my life was in his hands. They carried me unconscious to the emergency room. A couple of weeks before this, I had been in that same room due to some parasites. During that visit, Dr. Alvaro Mieja had seen me. By the grace of God, Dr. Mieja, who knew my medical history, was there when they brought me in. Due to the loss of blood, Dr. Mieja put me under anesthesia immediately and began a race against time to save my life. In the meantime, at the restaurant El Rodizio, the police were in charge of cleaning up the final results of the horrific incident. They recovered the body. 95 rounds had been shot with 9mm guns. 32 of those had hit Nicole Parra. 10 ended the life of Oscar Echevarri. 7 the life of Juan Carlos Delgado. And 8 hit me. As I struggled between life and death, my conscience traveled through valleys and mountains, passing through places that my father and uncle had at one time described to us as their respective places of birth, where they had gone on to endure childhoods filled with difficulties that would lead them to become what later on the whole world would know them as, the big bosses, the leaders of the Cali Cartel.